was the last week of school before Christmas break. That meant that the students and teachers of Ridgecrest Christian Preparatory Academy had little intention of actually working. Most of our classes had become a social hour, except for Mr. Winthrop's. Good old Mr. Winthrop had decided to take this opportunity to give his senior English class a writing assignment. He requested that each student write a two-page essay detailing their holiday traditions. The class groaned in their displeasure. All of them except the golden boy, Jeremy Bascom. Jeremy Bascom was perfect. Perfectly blonde, blue eyes, and a pearly white smile. The kind of boy you wanted your daughter to date. Jeremy would credit this to being perfectly made by his Lord and Savior. However, his one annoying quality was the need to remind everyone of his faith, and of course the pitfalls of anyone who did not believe as he. Jeremy and his small group of like-minded friends were quick to correct anyone who thought different and enjoyed any opportunity to spread the message of their faith. Let's just say Jeremy was a walking, talking reminder of what it meant to be Christian. Everything about him showed it. All the way down to the golden cross that was permanently pinned to his polo shirts. When given the task of writing about the reason for the season, Jeremy was more than enthused. Trust me, he did have one simple question, however, as he raised his hand. Yes, what should those of us write about who do not celebrate Christmas? Jeremy remarked while glaring across the room towards the pale and dark-haired girl in the corner of the room. Emma Campbell responded with a sneer and raised her middle finger. It was absolutely no secret that Emma did not believe in God, but teenage rumors had spread that she practiced the dark arts of witchcraft. The simple truth was, the only thing Emma knew of spells and magic were the stories her grandmother had told her of the old days in Scotland. As a child, she would sit, her bright green eyes wide as her ancestor Christmas traditions, not just Christians, and I'm interested in reading about all of them. So please, give me your best work. When the bell rang to signal the end of the period, the room went silent. Scribbling noise to a clamor of shuffling seats. Mr. Winthrop raised his voice in an attempt to remind them all that the assignment would be due before each of them left for the holidays. Mind you, few of them were actually paying any attention. However, Emma was the last to exit the room, much like always, and quietly navigated between the hordes of teenagers within the hall. When she approached her locker, wouldn't you know it, but Jeremy Bascom and his goons had congregated around it. She sighed, knowing that she would have to endure a lecture to gain access to her belongings. Jeremy's smirk made her sick, despite how perfect his teeth were. Please, just let me get to my locker, Emma begged. But Jeremy leaned forward. First, let me see what you're writing for Mr. W's class. Emma's eyes rolled as she felt her notebook pulled free from her hands. She yelled for it to be returned, but the group had quickly surrounded Jeremy. They hovered over the pages and read about a celebration of the winter solstice. A joyous time of giving, decoration, and feast. Emma had been taught long ago that many of the Christian traditions had been borrowed from pagan ones and adapted to form what we know as Christmas. She studied Jeremy's face and watched it change from amusement to anger with each of the passing words on the page. Emma knew that within Jeremy's mind she was a sinner, a blasphemer, and doomed to the pits of hell. She could see it in his eyes when he finally looked at her. God does not like it when we spread lies, especially about him, Jeremy said, as he began tearing the pages from Emma's notebook. Emma's voice roared. They aren't lies, they're stories my grandmother used to tell me. Emma refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She held strong to the tears that wished to flow from her eyes as her notebook was shoved back into her arms. This was something Emma had become accustomed to. The group dispersed as the next bell rang, and though she should have made her way to class, her heart was no longer in it. Instead, she made her way to the restroom and sat within a stall to release her sorrow drop by drop into her palms. In that tiny space, she found herself beseeching the gods of her grandmother to save her from this pain he was putting her through. Emma hoped that the god of revenge, Aron, would come swoop in and teach Jeremy Bascom a person stopped beside the dogs, a frail and withered hand pushed back the hood to reveal the wrinkled and worn face of an old crone. Her eyes were glassy, much like that of the sightless, but she stared intently at Emma as if she were peering into her very soul. The woman gave a gentle smile and reached out her hand to brush at Emma's cheek. The woman's smell was of fresh grass, and the sensation was calming. She felt like a child again. Her childlike feeling, being soothed by her grandmother whenever she was in pain. Young one, do not despair. We see you, the woman spoke softly. A tear rolled from one of Emma's eyes as she spoke. Who are you? A friend of your family, my dear, the woman replied. You may call me Matilda. Is this the place my grandmother told me about? Emma whispered. Matilda nodded. This place is full of magic, and if you believe, you will witness all of the magic that's in your heart. And with those words, small specks of light erupted from the flowers beneath Emma's feet. They danced within the air around her body, and a sound like tiny, tiny voices singing echoed in her ears. It was soft and soothing like a lullaby. Her eyes began to flutter and her knees became weak. Emma knelt within the soft grass and found herself laying down within the poppies. The sweet smell of the flowers, the calming song, and the comforting ground beneath her lulled her to sleep. Her body lay still while the old crone and her hounds disappeared into the birches beyond the clearing, humming a tune from a time long since past. Emma did not stir the rest of the night, and a smile of contentment rested on her lips. The following day, Emma felt rejuvenated. It was almost as if every weight of the world she lived in had been lifted from her shoulders. There was even a sparkle in her emerald green eyes, a light that not even the heckling from Jeremy and his friends could dim. Their laughter faded into the distance as she thought about her dream. It actually left the group confused, especially Jeremy. A seed of curiosity was planted at that very moment. Jeremy had to know why Emma seemed so at peace. Before he had completely thought about his actions, his feet were moving. He picked up the pace until he was walking in stride with Emma. What's got you in such a good mood? He quizzed. Emma smirked. Wouldn't you like to know? She disappeared into her biology class, and when Jeremy tried to follow, Mrs. Simmons stopped him and questioned if he might be lost. See, Jeremy did not share this class with Emma. As she took her seat, she gave a slight giggle at the sight of the boy being escorted from the room. Even if Jeremy had not properly received the punishment branches of birch trees. She could not get the image of her dream out of her head, and just thinking of Matilda made her smile, and something about that upset Jeremy. He could not get Emma out of his head. Emma's smile was like an itch. Jeremy just could not scratch. He was distracted by this smile and her happiness for the rest of the day and during his evening meal with his family. Normally he was enthusiastic about sharing the events of school. He liked to share them with his mother and father, but not tonight. He actually asked to be excused early. Jeremy changed for bed, praying that a good night's rest would ease his inner turmoil. But as soon as he shut his eyes, Emma's face awaited him. Her wavy brown hair, sparkling green eyes, and supple pink lips haunted him. He tossed and turned, adjusted his pillows, and fought with his own imagination for hours before finally finding sleep. His mind could not let go of the image, and it slowly crept its way into his dreams. Jeremy awoke lying in a bed of grass surrounded by poppies. The cool night air whipped through the birch trees that circled the clearing, and the only light was that of the full moon above. He lifted his body up slightly, resting his weight on his elbows. From the forest beyond, a form approached. As the thin figure stepped out into the moonlight, he recognized Emma's face. She slowly approached, grasping hold of the hem of her pale blue gown. She knelt beside him and whispered his name. He stared at her mouth, noticing how red and plump they seemed, almost like an apple. Her smile slowly crooked into a smirk as she lifted her pale form off of him. She pulled her gown back up over her shoulders and bound the strappings. She bent slightly, kissing Jeremy on his forehead before pressing her index finger to her lips as if to tell him to keep this a secret. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she disappeared into the birches. Jeremy was left soaked in his own sweat. In the middle of the clearing, he jerked awake to find himself still in his bed. All of it had been a dream. He spent the next few moments asking for forgiveness for his lustful thoughts, and prayed for the strength to ignore them if they were to return. Emma's smile failed to leave her as the rest of the week progressed, and it was torturous to Jeremy. He could not take it anymore. Every time his eyes fell upon her, all he could think of was his dream. He prayed more in the days that followed than he ever had before in his entire life. He prayed for relief from the torment, but it never came. When he could stand it no longer, he found his way to Emma's locker and waited. When she arrived to retrieve her things at the end of the day, Jeremy stood tapping his foot impatiently. His hair was a mess. His eyes were no longer crystal blue, but dark, and almost resembled an addict that had to have his fix in a few days, or had not had his fix in a few days. Emma looked at him and asked, "Rough couple of days. Are you okay?" Jeremy tried to smile. Yeah, you could say that. "Okay, well, do you mind if I get to my locker?" Emma questioned. Jeremy quickly stepped to the side. Yeah, sure. The thing is, I was wondering if I don't know if you might want to, Emma giggled slightly, listening to the stammering of the boy. "Spit it out, I gotta get going." Jeremy attempted to steel himself, his eyes getting more serious. "Will you go out with me?" Emma could hardly contain her laughter. It erupted from her mouth and echoed through the hallway. She had no words to properly respond. Jeremy attempted to laugh as well, but he could not find humor in his question. He needed her to say yes. He asked again, but she simply ignored the question and closed her locker. shot open, releasing his hold on her arm in a second. Emma was shocked at Jeremy's actions, but even more frightened of the look in his eyes. She could see not only anger but madness behind those eyes. She did not hesitate to step back and head towards the door. Within moments, she was out the door and on her bus. Jeremy was left defeated in the hallway, wondering how he could have been led to this madness. He only had one answer. Emma must have cast a spell on him, and he would have to break it. That was the only way for him to return to sanity and possibly save his soul from damnation. The plot began to form in his brain as he exited the building and sat in his car. His tires poured smoke as he peeled out of the parking lot and down the road for home. The next day, Emma had made it a point to avoid Jeremy, which she found to actually be very easy because he had not attended classes that day. She just had to make it until the end of school, and would be out for the holidays. She could not help but wonder what had possessed Jeremy to act the way only served to make him more furious. It felt as though he was being tortured little by little, and he was unsure of how much more he could take. He watched and waited as the light of the moon illuminated the night. His eyes were intent on that window until the light went out, and he was sure everyone inside would be asleep. He stepped from his car and quietly approached the front yard. Gathering small pebbles in his hand, he prepared to hurl them to Emma's window to get her attention. The sound of tapping caused Emma to stir. She had fallen asleep in her grandmother's gown and felt foolish for still having it on. But then the tapping came again and caused her to turn to the window. She stared as another small fragment collided with the window pane. She eased from her bed and slowly made her way to the wall. Jeremy was retting another rock when he noticed her face. He smiled and waved from the ground. Emma unlatched the window, eased it open in order to lean out. Jeremy, what in the heck are you doing here? She whispered in an annoyed tone. Oh, sorry for coming over so late, but I really wanted to apologize for the other day. Jeremy responded, trying to remain as quiet as he could. Oh, God, Emma rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, apologize and get out of here. Oh, come on, Jeremy begged. At least let me say it face to face. Look, you keep it up, and my parents are going to wake up, she scolded. And trust me, you do not want my dad to get you out here. Oh, just come down and let me say what I need to say, and you won't see me again, Jeremy pleaded. Fine, Emma huffed, but go around back. They will hear me open the front door. Jeremy almost leaped with excitement as he rounded the house and headed towards the back porch. Emma leaned back in and shut the window. As she headed to her door, she looked at herself in the mirror one more time. She grasped her grandmother's pendant and said a little prayer for protection. She hoped that whatever had been watching out for her would continue to do so. She then crept down the stairs and through the kitchen towards her back door. Her eyes scanned the porch, but could not see Jeremy. Her fingers slowly disengaged the lock and turned the knob. While easing the door open, she called out quietly into the night, but received no response. Jeremy, she hissed, this isn't funny. As she stepped out onto the porch, she noticed how bright the moon was. If you don't cut it out, I'm going to go back inside. Her words were cut short as a cloth-covered hand clamped down across her mouth. A scent of strong chemical engulfed her nose, and her head began to spin. Her limbs suddenly felt weak as she fell back into Jeremy's arms. He was speaking to her, but the words were distant and muffled. It was followed by a maddening grin just before everything went black. her grandmother came to her in a vision, whispering softly for her to be strong and remember the birches. When Emma came to, she found her mouth bound shut with part of her gown. It had been ripped into pieces and tied firmly across her lips. She tried to scream for help, but the trees around her were unfamiliar. Jeremy had apparently transported her deep into the wooded area behind her house, and at this time of night, no one would hear her. It did not take long for salty specks to stain her cheeks. Emma's eyes scanned the area, hoping that maybe he had seen someone else in the woods, because she had no idea what Jeremy had in store for her, but all she knew is that he let out a flurry of curses and then stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting from side to side, and she wondered what he noticed in the woods. Maybe he had seen someone else. But that was when she noticed the stark white rows of birches. Jeremy walked forward, avoiding the ghostly trees around him. Within moments, he found himself in the middle of a clearing that was only lit by that full moon above. Poppies scattered across the ground in front of him, and it did not take long for either of them to recognize their location. Emma had never known there to be a place like this in the woods behind her home, but she had never actually ventured very far before. She wondered if the old woman would appear again to save her, but that thought was destroyed when Jeremy slung her body to the ground. She tried to yell for help again, but the lack of movement from her being tied up and her mouth being bound kept her from really any pleas. Yet the back of Jeremy's hand silenced her quickly. He searched the area frantically as if looking for something. When he did not find what he was looking for, he turned back to Emma. "What did you do to me?" Again she tried to respond, but the gag prevented it. At this point her eyes were swollen from her constant sobbing. Within her head, she was begging for help from anyone or anything that could save her. Jeremy approached, wild-eyed, as he tugged at his belt buckle. It did not take long for Emma to realize his intention. Jeremy pulled down his pants as she tried to crawl away. In moments, his body was on top of her, and he was pulling at her. Trying to pull down her underwear, she could smell the warmth of his breath bursting from his mouth. Jeremy had been drinking. She wriggled, squirmed, and grasped at Jeremy's face in an attempt to fight him off. But he was simply too strong. She begged for him to stop. Behind, through the gag. "You have warped my mind and perverted it. You have torn me away from God's grace." Jeremy's saliva scattered across her face as he yelled. "You are an evil and spiteful witch, and it is time you are punished for cursing me with this. You do not deserve to be saved." His voice growled mere inches from Emma's nose. Emma knew that if she did not do something, Jeremy would have spilled crimson liquid across her once pink lips, and she screamed in agony. She tried to hold on to her grandmother's gown as Jeremy began to claw at her. She could feel his hardness pressed against her, and there was little time left. That was when she felt the pendant around her neck. She grasped it tightly in her hand and shoved it forward. The hard edge of the silver cut a gash above Jeremy's eye. Blood poured from the wound while he cried out in pain. Jeremy stumbled back, holding his head and cursing Emma's name. She crawled backwards on her elbows a few feet from removing the gag finally and attempted to get her to her feet. She stumbled and watched Jeremy fall back against one of the birch trees. He propped himself up with one hand, the blood from his forehead staining the white bark. The look in his eyes had not left him. His intent was still true. In his mind he would have Emma, and there was nothing, no one, that would stop him. He lurched forward but was drawn back by the hand that rested on the tree. His hand was stuck, almost as if glued to the wood. Small specks of light rose from the grass and began to dance around the clearing. A song drifted through the wind, and suddenly Emma felt safe. Jeremy's blood continued to flow from his cut across his neck and down his arm. The blood almost melted with the bark and began to fade into it. The red liquid became white and rigid along with his fingers. They both watched as inch by inch his skin turned into wood. When the truth of the situation became clear to Jeremy, he looked back towards Emma, his face no longer full of anger, but instead replaced with fear. Emma's mouth opened, and her voice emitted words of which she had never spoken, and yet she seemed to understand them. It was a dialect that her grandmother would sometimes use when telling her stories. Lay kumahadan da arwin korenden midu drak venden dandan seyo lesna kraban bitit sin. Help me, yelled as his arms became one with the tree. Emma simply turned away from the horrible sight and looked towards the path they had taken to enter. The old crone stood at the edge of the birch with her two pale hounds. Her index finger was pressed to her lips as if telling the girl to keep their secret. When Emma looked back, all that remained of Jeremy was his other hand. The fingers were still reaching out for help as the white bark engulfed them. Each digit became small branches of the newly formed tree. The tree leaned outward from the larger tree beside it, still trying to flee, but it was no use. The deed was done. The tree was unrecognizable from the other split-formed birches in the area. Emma turned and witnessed just how many similar birches encircled it. She wondered if each one had been someone to cross her family. She looked back in hopes of thanking the old woman for her help, but she and her pets were gone. The fair-skinned girl who had escaped a fate worse than death flakes of winter began to coat the ground. As months passed, the mystery of Jeremy's disappearance had faded from popular conversation. The authorities assumed he simply just ran away. Emma was the only one who knew different. So when the